What if I told you that the entire global economy, every job, every price tag, every mortgage payment you're struggling with right now, is being controlled not by your government, not by Wall Street, but by the shadow of wars you didn't start and didn't choose? The International Monetary Fund, one of the most powerful financial institutions on the planet, has just released a warning so serious that world leaders are losing sleep over it. They're not using soft language anymore. They're calling it exactly what it is. The world economy is living in the shadow of war. And here's the terrifying part. This isn't just about countries at war. This is about your grocery bill, your salary, your retirement savings, and the future your children are going to inherit. Every single one of those things is now under threat. So today, on the John Ag Official, we are breaking this down from the top. What the IMF actually said, why it matters to ordinary people, and what nobody in mainstream media is telling you about where this is all heading. Let's go back to the basics for a second, because a lot of people hear IMF warning and immediately tune out. They think it's just economists talking to each other in fancy rooms. But the IMF is not just some think tank. It is the financial backbone of the global world order. When the IMF speaks, central banks listen. When the IMF releases a forecast, finance ministers adjust their budgets. When the IMF uses the word crisis, markets around the world start moving within hours. So when they say the world economy is in the shadow of war, that is not a metaphor. That is a code red. The IMF's World Economic Outlook, which is released multiple times a year, has become increasingly alarming since 2022. But this latest assessment goes further than anything we've seen in decades. They are pointing directly at ongoing geopolitical conflicts and military escalations as the number one threat to global economic stability. And what makes this moment so unique and so dangerous is that it's not just one war. It's not just one conflict zone. We are watching multiple military and political fires burn simultaneously across different parts of the world, and the economic smoke from all of them is choking the global system at the same time. The IMF's leadership has been extraordinarily blunt in recent public statements. The language coming out of their reports is not the careful, hedged economist speak we're used to hearing. They are warning directly that geopolitical fragmentation is tearing apart the trade networks, the financial systems, and the investment flows that have kept the global economy growing for the past 30 years. They've highlighted that global growth is being revised downward, and the primary driver of that downward revision is conflict and the instability that flows from it. Defense spending is exploding across dozens of countries simultaneously, which sounds like good news for weapons manufacturers. But the real story is what that money is not being spent on: schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and innovation. The IMF has also specifically warned about the danger of what economists call geoeconomic fragmentation. In plain English, that means the world is splitting into rival economic blocs. Countries are starting to trade less with their enemies and more only with their allies, and that is massively inefficient. It raises costs, reduces productivity, and slows down the kind of technological progress that lifts living standards for everyone. They've also flagged a risk of commodity shocks, situations where war disrupts the supply of critical resources like oil, natural gas, wheat, and rare earth minerals. We already saw this play out devastatingly when the conflict in Ukraine sent energy and food prices skyrocketing across Europe and beyond. And the IMF is warning that this kind of shock could happen again on an even larger scale. Here's what the headlines always miss. When economists talk about GDP growth slowing by 1 or 2 percentage points, it sounds abstract. It sounds like a number on a spreadsheet. But let me translate that into real life for you. Slower growth means fewer jobs being created. It means companies cutting hiring budgets and freezing wages. It means governments collecting less tax revenue, which means less money for public services. It means higher borrowing costs for small businesses, which means some of them close. All of that cascades down directly onto working families. And those families are already exhausted from the inflation wave they just lived through. The IMF has been very clear that the burden of geopolitical economic disruption falls disproportionately on the poorest nations and the poorest communities within every nation. When food prices spike because of a war in a grain-producing region, rich people in rich countries feel mildly inconvenienced. But people in lower-income countries, and lower-income households everywhere, can literally not afford to eat. That is not an exaggeration. That is documented reality. We also have to talk about debt. Many countries borrowed heavily during the COVID-19 pandemic to keep their economies alive. They are now carrying enormous debt loads, and they're trying to pay those debts back in a world of higher interest rates and lower growth. The IMF has flagged that debt distress, the point where a country simply cannot service what it owes, is becoming a serious risk across parts of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. War and geopolitical tension make this problem dramatically worse, because foreign investors flee uncertainty, capital flows dry up, and governments are left with even fewer options. For decades after World War II, the world built something remarkable. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fair to everyone equally, and it had serious flaws. But it was a system of interlocking trade relationships, international institutions, and shared economic rules that prevented the kind of catastrophic economic collapse we saw in the 1930s. That system is now under enormous stress. The IMF is watching it fracture in real time, and they are deeply alarmed. Supply chains that once crossed the globe seamlessly are being redesigned along political lines. Technology is being weaponized as an economic tool, with countries blocking the export of advanced semiconductors, restricting access to critical software, and building digital walls to separate their economies from rivals. This is sometimes called friendshoring or nearshoring. The idea that you only do business with your political allies and you bring critical manufacturing back closer to home. And there's a logic to it from a national security perspective. But the economic cost is enormous. The IMF estimates that deep global fragmentation could reduce world GDP by several percentage points permanently, meaning the world could end up significantly poorer forever, compared to a scenario where countries continue to trade freely with each other. Think about what a permanent reduction in global wealth means over 20 or 30 years. Think about how many diseases go uncured because research budgets shrink. Think about how many people remain in poverty because economic growth slows. Think about how many young people lose opportunities because the economy they're entering is smaller and more restricted than it should have been. That is the shadow the IMF is talking about. That is what war costs, even when the bombs aren't falling on your city. The IMF's warning exists in a political context that we cannot ignore. The institution itself was founded on the belief that international economic cooperation is better for everyone than economic nationalism and conflict. But the world right now is trending sharply toward nationalism, toward building walls rather than bridges, and toward viewing economic relationships through the lens of competition and threat rather than mutual benefit. We are seeing this in the United States with the resurgence of tariffs and protectionist trade policies. We are seeing it in Europe as nations scramble to reduce their dependence on Russian energy and Chinese manufacturing. We are seeing it across Asia as regional powers arm themselves and position for dominance. Every one of these moves is rational from a narrow national perspective, but collectively they add up to a world that is becoming less cooperative, less open, and less economically efficient. The IMF is essentially trying to sound an alarm before the alarm is too late to matter. They are saying to the world's political leaders, the decisions you're making right now in pursuit of security and national interest are building an economic future that will be significantly worse for your own citizens. And the tragedy is that the leaders who are making these decisions will mostly not be in power by the time the full economic consequences arrive. Their successors will inherit the damage. Now, I want to be clear that this channel is not about doom and gloom for its own sake. We believe in giving you the full picture, including the difficult parts that most people prefer to look away from. But we also believe in giving you a realistic sense of what could go right. The IMF itself has not given up on international cooperation. They continue to advocate for dialogue, for multilateral solutions to debt crises, for trade frameworks that reduce rather than amplify tensions. There are real economists and real policymakers working every single day on solutions to the problems we've discussed in this video. The situation is serious, but it is not hopeless. There are also things you can do at the individual level to position yourself better in a world of higher uncertainty and slower growth. Understanding what's happening economically, which is exactly what you're doing right now, is the first and most important step. Diversifying your income streams, reducing unnecessary debt, building savings buffers, understanding how global events affect your local economy, all of these things matter, and they matter more now than they did 5 or 10 years ago. The IMF has spoken, and the message is unmistakable. The world economy is not operating under normal conditions. It is operating under the long, heavy shadow of war, multiple wars, multiple conflicts, and the political fractures that those wars are deepening every single day. This is not a story that is going to resolve itself quickly or neatly. This is going to define the economic landscape for the next decade, at minimum, and the people who understand what is happening are going to be in a far better position than the people who are kept in the dark. That is why the John Ag Official exists. Because the truth matters, even when the truth is uncomfortable. Especially when the truth is uncomfortable. If this video opened your eyes to something important, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button right now because we are just getting started. Stay informed, stay sharp. I'll see you in the next one.